In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. When I was much younger, about 17 or 18 years old, after supper with my family, there was one thing that I wanted more than anything else, and that was to get out of the house. I just wanted to be with my friends and relax and talk about stuff, nothing important, but just to get away from family. And I love my family, but I want a break. And this was especially true in the summertime on weekends. I had two close friends, Walter Siegel and George Smith. And we enjoyed, especially in the summer, going for a ride in the car, no particular destination. We just kind of loop around the countryside outside of town. Often we end up at a roadside ice cream stand or someplace where we could get some ice cream or a soda or something like that. And then we come home, no big deal. The biggest concern was who was going to drive. Our three families each had only one car. That was kind of the custom back then. And my father was a priest in the Episcopal Church, and he very much wanted to have a car available because the community that we lived in, there were frequent medical emergencies, and he liked to go to the hospital as soon as he got word that somebody had been hospitalized. And sometimes there would be more urgent accidents and things like that. And I respected that. And Walter, he had two older siblings, so there was competition in the family for the use of the family car. George Smith was an only child, and his parents didn't use the car very much at all, so he often got the job of being the designated driver, and he'd come pick me up at my house, and then we'd drive up the street to where Walter lived, about a mile away or so, and every time we stopped to pick up Walter, same thing happened. George would pull up right in front of the house, beat the horn. Walter would come out on the front porch with his mother. Walter gave his mother a hug, kiss, walked across the porch, down the steps, down the walk, through the gate, to the car, hand on the car handle, door handle, open the door, and just as Walter was about to get in the car, his mother would shout out, "Walter, remember who you are." Happened every time, just like I described. Every time. Now, I don't think that Walter's mother was afraid that Walter was going to get a sudden attack of amnesia, or forget his name, or forget who he was, or how to find his way home. No, you know what Mrs. Siegel was getting at. Walter, you stand for something. Don't forget it. See, the Siegels, like every family, had raised their children to have certain principles, certain values. She wasn't trying to arrest his development at a certain age. No, she had dreams and hopes for Walter's future, that he'd go to college, he'd develop a good career, that he'd be successful and happy. But she also knew that while Walter's identity would evolve with experience, especially different experiences than what he experienced at home, she knew that those basic values and principles that she and her husband had tried to inculcate in their children would last a lifetime. And the particular aspect, the particular activity that George and Walter and I were going on, it was relatively harmless. But who knows what strange idea might have come into one of our heads the bar and see if we can buy beer, even though we're underage. Or something like that. I mean, that's what it would have been then. Might be something different today. And what she was saying, remember your values and your principles so you don't make a mistake and go off the rails and do something that you might someday regret. We all have those values, those principles that our parents gave us. We may not think about them very much, but probably there are times in our lives, regardless of our age, when we're facing a crisis of some kind or another, and we end up leaning on those values, those childhood values. Today, we're celebrating, commemorating the life of Alexander Crummell. Excuse me a minute. I need a cheat sheet. I can't keep dates in my head. I want you to get a sense of chronology of his life. Alexander Crummell was born on the 3rd of March in 1819 in New York City. His mother was a freed slave. His father was a freed slave. His grandfather, on his father's side, in other words, his father's father, was born in Sierra Leone. And when he was 13 years old, he was captured by slave traders. And they brought him to the United States. I tried to get a little more detail about where he was and how he got his freedom and how Alexander's mother got her freedom. And I didn't have resources that led me in that direction. His parents, because they were free people, were very active in the movement to abolish slavery, the abolitionist movement. And they were quite active. They even published a newspaper for that movement in their home. And Alexander grew up in that atmosphere where the main concern of the family of his parents was the abolitionist movement. And perhaps because his father was so close, just one generation away from having been brought to this country in chains, there maybe was a closer affinity with the continent of Africa and the people of Africa. Because Alexander grew up with an affinity for Africans. His parents did the best they could to provide him with a quality education. That was not easy, even though it was New York City and in the north. Many schools did not accept African American students. Nevertheless, he had some educational opportunities, and while in school decided that he wished to become a priest of the Episcopal Church. He applied to General Theological Seminary in New York City, but was rejected because of the color of his skin. He found some clergy with whom he could study. And he learned enough to satisfy the Bishop of Massachusetts to ordain him. And he was ordained in that diocese in 1842. In 1847, 5 years later, he went to England. He had an opportunity to go to England to speak to people there about slavery in the United States and about the abolitionist movement. His purpose was to raise money that would come back here to support those causes, as well as his congregation in Massachusetts. While there, he had an opportunity to study at Queen's College at Cambridge University. And he did that. He managed to take enough courses to satisfy the requirements for a degree. And he was graduated, the first black man to receive a degree from Queens College, Cambridge. While he was doing his education in Cambridge, he developed the concept of Pan-Africanism. It wasn't unique to him, but he saw it in a way that was different from others. He wanted to bring together all people who could trace their ancestry back to the continent of Africa. And wherever they lived, in Africa or in Europe or in the United States or South America, wherever, to develop bonds of solidarity that transcended borders, so that identity as an African would develop worldwide. And he believed that this might be a movement that would stamp out slavery wherever it existed, if black folk had that kind of sense of connectedness with other black folks, wherever they were. After he graduated, he moved to Liberia in 1853. He was officially a missionary of the Episcopal Church, but he developed the goal of trying to convert the entire continent of Africa to Christianity. Now that was an overly ambitious and unrealistic goal, but he thought perhaps he might be able to implement that in Liberia. And so these two threads came together: the Pan-Africanism, that sense of connectedness among Africans wherever they lived, and this desire to convert people to Christianity. And they kind of merged in Liberia. Alexander Crummell started schools. He had a profound influence on a number of Liberia's leaders. He really left his mark on Liberia. He was there 20 years. And interestingly, he returned to the United States from Liberia in 1873. In other words, he was in Liberia during the build-up to the Civil War, and the aftermath of the Civil War, which when he came back, gave him a unique perspective on the state. And when he came back, it was the period of Reconstruction. And so he was able to see that in a very different way than other people did. When he came back from Liberia, he came to Washington. St. John's Church, Lafayette Square, across the White House, had started a mission church for African American freed slaves and otherwise freed people in Foggy Bottom. Foggy Bottom at that time was a predominantly African American neighborhood. And it was a swampy neighborhood. It was a difficult place. And so St. John's Church said, we're going to start a mission congregation in this neighborhood, and we need somebody to lead it. And here's this Alexander Crummell who just came back from Liberia. So St. John's called Alexander Crummell to be the first pastor, the founding pastor of St. Mary's Church in Foggy Bottom. It exists today, you know it. You pass it on 23rd Street Northwest, brick building right up on the sidewalk. He was there about 2 years, and there was a controversy in the congregation. Again, I tried to find out what the particulars were. It was not successful. But there was a dispute, and the congregation split. And Alexander Crummell and about 30 or 40 members of St. Mary's Church left, leaving behind other members of the congregation with some bitterness. Alexander Crummell and the 35 or 40 people came to this neighborhood to start a new church. They did it independently. It wasn't sponsored by St. John's or the diocese or any other congregation in the area. It was totally an independent effort. That is what became St. Luke's Church. So St. Mary's Foggy Bottom is the first African-American congregation in what is now the Diocese of Washington, Back then it was the Diocese of Maryland. It's now the Diocese of Washington, which was carved out of the Diocese of Maryland. St. Luke's is the first independent African-American congregation in the Diocese of Washington. The congregation, with Alexander Crummell's leadership, raised the money to buy this property and build this building. This happened about 1875 when the split occurred. And by 1879, the building was far enough along that they could worship in it. And the first worship service was held, I don't know what part of this, what we're in right now, was completed at that point, but they were able to hold services around Thanksgiving Day. My guess is probably sometime right before Christmas, early Advent. Alexander Crummell, this congregation became self-supporting very quickly, and Alexander Crummell became its rector. There was another fight. In 1894. And the result of that fight within this congregation prompted Alexander Crummell to tender his resignation. He taught for 2 years at Howard University, was responsible for a number of African-American organizations coming into being in this city, and then moved to New Jersey, and he died there in 1898, 79 years old, and he died on September 10th. Tomorrow is the anniversary of his death, and we commemorate saints on the anniversary of their deaths. So we're sneaking it a day early, but that's because it's Sunday. Tomorrow's the real day. One of the sources that I used to gather information about his life made a very interesting point, that Alexander Crummell's legacy was not just in what he accomplished, but in his influence on other people, other organizations in Liberia. I think it's a very interesting testimony that his legacy consisted more of influence than accomplishments. But you see the pattern? Remember who you are. Back to Mrs. Siegel. All the way through, Alexander Crummell remembered who he was. The principles, the values about Africa, ending slavery, about the rights of all people, the rights of African Americans. He stuck to those principles and values all the way through. Okay, let's get up to speed. Let's fast forward to today. Here it is, St. Luke's Church. In 2018, first services were held in this building in 1879. Imagine with me. 1879, if those doors were actually in place, you looked out those doors, what you would see would be very different from what you see now. The neighborhood has changed around St. Luke's. And St. Luke's has changed. I'm not sure they've changed together. But I know, because I've been in Washington a while, what this neighborhood was like after the riots. Dr. King was killed. Thomas Circle. Just say the name Thomas Circle, and people thought all kinds of illegal, immoral activity. About 20 years ago, 30 years ago, somewhere in that period, a number of people in this general area decided they were going to make a difference. And I can't tell you how it all came about. I do know that the two churches that are on Thomas Circle had played a very significant role in trying to change the atmosphere in Thomas Circle. But the things I've read about this neighborhood say that the key factor was Whole Foods. When Whole Foods decided to build a store down the block, that was the beginning of a real change. I'm sure that was a risky move for Whole Foods. At that time, this was not a neighborhood that you'd associate with a lot of Whole Foods customers or Whole Paycheck customers, some people call it. But it paid off. And because Whole Foods built a store here, other developers said, well, we're going to get this property across the street from Whole Foods and build apartments and offices and stores and so on. We're going right across the street from here. The neighborhood has changed. It's very different. Maybe we need to play a little catch-up. St. Luke's is in a very interesting place right now. It's in between rectors. It does not have a full-time rector. Ray Metzenberg resigned last spring. Since then, you've had people like me, supply priests, maybe one Sunday here, one Sunday there, a couple Sundays in a row. But not much continuity. And no real leadership. Just Sunday services. This is the size of congregation this size. Needs a full-time rector to function effectively, to prosper and to grow. So why aren't you working to get a full-time rector? Because you're not ready. There are issues that need to be addressed. It's true almost every congregation when there's a departure of a rector. They need to stop and catch their breath, take stock, take their bearings, figure out where they're going from here. Doing that gets the congregation ready to search for and call for a new rector. I view this time between regular rectors as a very important period in a congregation's life. And I say that from experience because I spent most of my career as a priest, as an interim priest, being that in-between clergy person. I should say, past tense, I would arrive after the previous rector has left, and I would leave before the next one arrived. And during that gap, during that period of time, we do a great deal of work, most of which can only be done when there isn't an installed permanent rector. Rectors in the Episcopal Church have lifetime tenure. Once they're called, once the bishop, quote unquote, installs them in a position, they are in that position for life, or as long as they wish to stay, actually, until mandatory retirement, which is set at age 72. Unless they choose to leave soon, or unless there's some kind of misconduct. But generally, the presumption when you call a rector is that person is going to be around a while. So it's not a decision to be entered into lightly. It needs to be done very deliberately and with a great deal of forethought. One of the congregations that I served as an interim rector, actually it was two congregations, they shared a rector. It was a yoked situation. Two congregations yoked to each other was the term that was used, because they shared the services of one priest. And it was kind of one congregation got 2/3 and the other congregation got 1/5. The previous rector had been there for 30 years. That's a long time. And everybody was ready for him to go, including him, and understandably so. And so the diocese, the bishop asked me if I would come to that congregation and help them work through all the issues that they needed to work through before they started searching for a permanent rector. And I talked to the vestry and the wardens, and we thought we could work together, and so I went there. And as soon as I started talking to people and taking the pulse, I realized that this yoke arrangement was very awkward for both congregations. There were different towns, there were different sizes, they had different types of people in the congregation. They were just so different, they had very little in common except the sharing of the rector, and it had been going on for a long time. And people questioned whether it was actually beneficial to the two congregations. They wondered if it might be holding them back. And so I appointed a Blue Ribbon Committee, 4 people from each congregation, to study the yoke. They spent almost a year doing research, taking surveys, having small group meetings with the members of the congregation, studying in great detail the finances of the yoke situation. And after that study, they recommended to both vestries that the yoke be dissolved and that both congregations go independent, be on their own. That could not have happened during the tenure of a regularly installed rector, because that rector would have an interest in his job. He might lose his job if the two congregations decided to split. I was leaving anyway. That's my job as an interim. You come and you go. So it was the ideal time to do that kind of work. And both congregations thrived once they were independent and functioning completely on their own. Both have expanded their facilities, both have started new programs, and they still have relationships. They do things together, but not like this. That's what can happen during the interim time. There are 5 basic tasks to the interim period. The first is to come to terms with history. To get together in small groups to talk about the relationship that this congregation has had with previous clergy. Yeah, it'll focus mostly on the person of the previous clergy, but what it really needs to focus on is the relationship, the working relationship. How well did we get accomplished what we wanted to do with Rector X or Rector Y? It's time for honesty. It's time for dealing with some emotional things that might have happened during the tenure of a rector, previous rector, or one before that. The second is to discover a new identity, apart from the relationship with previous clergy. The example I just gave of the 2 yoke congregations, they both developed a new sense of who they were, where they were going. I like to ask the congregation, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? And if the answer that I get back is not visionary, if it's not detailing some kind of hope and dream of something that's different from the situation today, then I could say to the congregation, you're stuck. And you need to get unstuck before you can move ahead. The pathway to the future for this congregation is the 9 o'clock Gospel Mass. It has the potential to bring in people to this congregation from this neighborhood who would not find this service right now appealing. They would find the music, the 9 o'clock service, which is voice, piano, drums, bass, to be much more to their liking, much more to their taste than the excellent music we enjoy at the service. It's not that one's bad or the other's good or whatever. It's just different. The people have different tastes. The 9 o'clock service is simpler. It's shorter. It's abbreviated. Things are left out that aren't necessary to begin with. But we like them. So if that's the path to the future of this congregation, there's a sign out in front of the church, which I checked this morning when I arrived. The sign is so faded, you can't see it from the street, or you can't read it from the street. Thousands of people go by this church every day. Some of them on foot, some of them on bicycles, some of them in cars. Best way to advertise that 9 o'clock service is people will look over because this building is impressive. If they see a sign that might catch their interest, they might show up next Sunday. But not if the sign can't be right. So we need to spend some effort in this new identity, making it possible for others to come in and join us in that new identity. The third task is shifts in leadership. It's time in the interim period for the people that have been doing everything all along to let go of some of those things. And for new people, other people, to take on the responsibilities that are now freed up. And hopefully redistribute those responsibilities so instead of one person doing a lot of work, 2 or 3 people are sharing that burden and functioning as teams. Teams, like a team on the baseball diamond or the basketball court. People working together toward one objective, not several different objectives. The fourth task is to strengthen ties with the diocese. During this interim period, the congregation is more in need of support from the diocese than at any other time in its life. And the fifth task is to get ready for the next rector. That means house cleaning, throwing things away, getting rid of junk, discontinuing activities that aren't working anymore. But we just keep doing them because that's the way we do things here. Time to put a stop to those and to experiment and try new things that can come into being during this time. Not making a decision, not preempting the leadership of the next rector, but just to have the congregation experience something different from what they've experienced before. History, leadership, identity, diocesan relationship, and getting ready for the next leader. Those are the 5 tasks of the interim period. Those are what should be requiring your attention right now. But you have to do that by remembering who you are. You've got a history that goes back to Alexander Crummell and his values and principles. And the values and principles that started and founded built this building. How do they come forward to the present and move us into the future? That's the work you need to do as a congregation during this time. All I can tell you is that one thing is very clear. Your primary principle, value, is that you love God. And that you show that love for God by following Jesus. And you seek to become more like Jesus every day, individually and corporately as a congregation. And then, as the Jesus movement, working out of this place, in this neighborhood, you try to transform lives the way Jesus would transform lives. You're, in effect, his ambassador, his agent, his representative outside that door. Because the Jesus that people meet through you may be the only Jesus they ever encounter. Amen.